Hello, friends. Thank you for clicking on this A Place for Humans podcast. I am the host, Dakota Wint, and this is a story that means a lot to me, meeting Ram Dass and going to India. So before we get into this very important story and chapter of my life, we're just going to do a quick little ad from our homies over at Skillshare. Enjoy the podcast. Oh, shit. Wrong button.
Take it easy, dude. But take it.
Do you need skills? Come with me. You see, I'm a man. And as a man, you need to go through life with skills. Whether that skills be learning witchcraft, like I'm doing now here in Catemaco in Veracruz, Mexico. This is the witchcraft capital of Mexico. Or maybe you have an interest in learning how to use technology, like cameras or Photoshop. No? You're not interested in any of those things? Well, how about you tune up your skills on some history? Or I don't know, maybe you're looking to become a man of nature, like me. Whatever it is you're searching for, you can find it over at Skillshare.com. Please use my link to sign up over at Skillshare. And for you, that discount is a free trial of Skillshare. Premium skills. Wherever you are in the world, think about it. Wherever you are, you're still there. The world can change, but you're still you. So all the skills that you gain from Skillshare will remain there, no matter what happens in the world. Skillshare.com. Please, if you are interested in Skillshare, sign up using the link that you see on the screen right here or in the description below. And yes, it is really cool. I personally use Skillshare myself, and anything you can think of is on there. Tarot reading is on there. Crystal, how to use crystals is on there. How to do your taxes is probably on there. Skillshare.com, baby. Enjoy the podcast.
This is the story of how I met Baba Ram Dass and ended up in India. Okay, well, so I first heard about Ram Dass when I was in high school, being interested in the 60s, the 70s, this whole hippie psychedelic revolution. I loved the aspect of the freedom, the liberation. That's the thing that attracted me about that whole movement, was the anti-war stuff, the completely just dropping out. Timothy Leary, who was with Ram Dass and is just equally an inspiration to me, he used to say, turn on, tune in, and drop out. Let's get a little Timothy Leary. Let's play a little Timothy Leary. But so their whole philosophy, or at least Timothy Leary's philosophy, was to just drop out of society. And I really like this idea because it's super revolutionary. Just saying no. Anyways, I always thought that was really cool, and that was like a huge inspiration for me in like the spirit of rebellion, the spirit of like true human nature, I feel like, in a way. And Timothy Leary. And I don't know, there's a part of me that wants to be free. I think there's a part of all of us that just wants to be free. We want to be liberated. And maybe not enlightened liberation, but this like a human. Because culture in a lot of ways seems to kind of put us into a cage. We all feel that, especially now in 2020 and 2021. You know, we see the negative effects in the streets of what culture does to you. Terence McKenna used to say, culture is not your friend. And I feel like we can see that now more than ever. Let me find this good Timothy Leary thing. So the 60s and the 70s were defined by this movement. The whole war on drugs started then as a sort of way to demonize this free movement of the hippies and of the Black Panther movement. There was so much going on politically in this time. True revolutions, true community, truth was being revealed about the nature of America, about the nature of how people feel. Again, the nature of how culture is not our friend. This is these are the moments when racism was very open. We can argue that it's still very open, but that was the civil rights movement, was during this time. Martin Luther King, Malcolm X. So the war in Vietnam, we have such a huge wave of stuff going on in the world that it inspired all these powerful movements. And then LSD just drops. LSD comes out of nowhere in a huge wave. It was starting already with the beatniks and stuff like that, but the people weren't really hip to anything yet. You have to think in the 50s when the beatniks, it's like Leave It to Beaver type stuff. People were living in that kind of American illusion. And then, you got like Jack Kerouac and all those merry pranksters that took that hippie bus across the states before there was even hippies. A good documentary to watch about that is called, what's that movie called? Sunshine Bus? I don't know. Just Google like documentary about the merry pranksters. And that's a great documentary about the beatniks, who were sort of these poets coming out of the jazz era. So they got this really hip way of talking. And Jack Kerouac is one of my favorite authors. The way he talks and the way he writes in these kind of long-winded sentences. And Allen Ginsberg. And these guys, Ram Dass was with all of these guys. But this really set the stage. These guys really set the stage, and they were super Buddhist and really interested in spirituality. But they set the stage for the hippie movement, which exploded at the end of the 60s and into the 70s. And okay, here's this little Timothy Leary thing I'm going to play. This is how cool Timothy Leary was and how relevant this shit was. I feel like now, 2021, we can all see the psychedelic revolution happening again. This is the wave, the kaleidoscopic echo that started back way when shamanism first started, but this is definitely the echo of the hippie movement, of the counterculture movement, the civil rights movement. Look around, it's still happening. We just had the largest protests in the world with the Black Lives Matter and the George Floyd stuff, and it's bigger than all of that. It's what this is it's a cry out. It's a cry out from a sick culture. We feel locked up, and especially communities like that. And what we're seeing is what Terence McKenna called the archaic revival. What we're seeing is our soul calling out for something true, for something authentic and felt by the body, the real human inside of us. Because if you think about where we're at now, look at us. I'm talking to these screens and I got all these electronics. We're pretty much out of the human experience if you compare us to anyone from any other era. We have food on demand. It just drops off on our porch. And so as a byproduct of all these sacrifices that we have released in exchange for convenience, at least here in the States, in these countries with the privilege of luxury in this kind of way. You know, in India, it's hard to find a supermarket. You just kind of go on the street and hope what you want is out there. So, okay, here's Timothy Leary.
We tell young people today, drop out of school, because schools, education today, is the worst narcotic drug of all. Don't politic, don't vote. These are old men's games. Impotent and senile old men that want to put you onto their old chess games of war and power. Drop out. Tune in with natural things. Take off your shoes. Get back in tune with God's harmony. Surround yourself with beauty and sacred objects. You can't get caught in the conforming, rote lockstep, which we call American society.
And something else, to go back to Terence McKenna's idea that we are experiencing an archaic revival. And you can see this being expressed through through things. I mean, the whole 20th century and 21st century so far has been completely defined by these movements to return to a more primal and tribal time. We might not recognize that that's what's happening, but if you examine it, I mean, look out into the world. Burning Man. I think Burning Man is one of the coolest accomplishments of our culture, because what it is the collective human imagination coming together for a week. No money. Everyone dresses how they want. It's a world of pure creativity, big sculptures, and it's a ritual. You burn the man at the end. In this giant fire, there's temples. There's basic understandings that all humans can agree with outside of all of the cultural shit that we sort of attach to our identities. There is something that connects all of us beyond that. And things like this, Burning Man, it might seem like this kind of, whatever, hippie shit on the surface. But the deeper expression of it is a call out to something pure inside of ourselves, an escape back to that place of where we once were. And things like dancing to drum and bass music or techno or this kind of stuff with all these psychedelic lights, and this is all, crazy hair and piercing, tattoos, rock and roll, all this stuff is an expression of our tribal past. Anyways, so, all of this is the reason that I was into this era, 60s, 70s, the 80s, and 90s, to be fair, the 2000s, and now this this psychedelic wave has never really slowed down. But I was into it because there's something true there, something about nature, something about spirit is there, and it's reminiscent of very beautiful cultures like the Shibibos, like the Navajos, like the Hindus, and you naturally get into Ram Dass when you get into this stuff, because if you ever taken LSD, you can have truly spiritual experiences. Same with mushrooms, same with ayahuasca. There is something about these psychedelics that does something to you. I don't know what it does, but it puts you into like a opportunity where you can high five God if you want. And you learn so much about the nature of what it means to be a human, all these terms we think we use now, like ego death, and we probably I feel like my mom doesn't know what an ego death is. People don't really know what ego death is, but these were actually Ram Dass and Timothy Leary were talking. I think Timothy Leary is the one that actually coined the term ego death. These guys were talking about it way back then. Look at this. I got this video pulled up of Ram Dass. talking about LSD. This is, what year is this? This must be the late 60s. Oh, and to give a little backstory of who Ram Dass was, Ram Dass and Timothy Leary were Harvard professors. They had permission to work on LSD. Ram Dass is bisexual. He had a crush on one of the students, gave the students LSD, and another student told on him, and he got fired. And then Timothy Leary said, fuck it, I'm going to quit. Ram Dass is my homie. Let's start the hippie revolution. So that's the story in a nutshell. But listen to this. This is great.
I'm reminded of a slogan or two I saw some students carrying once. One said, all wars are civil wars because all men are brothers. And another one said, there is no they.
Right, exactly. And that's one of the components of the LSD experience. The understanding that there is no they. There's no other. It is all one. And it's really, what happens here is, there are a lot of experiments in psychology with figure ground. That is the relation of the background to what stands out. All right? Now, in our culture, we've been trained for individual differences to stand out. So you look at each person, immediate hit is brighter, dumber, older, younger, richer, poorer, and we make all these dimensional distinctions, put them in categories, and treat them that way. And we get so that we only see others as separate from ourselves in the ways in which they're separate. And one of the dramatic characteristics of the psychedelic experience is being with another person and suddenly seeing the ways in which they are like you, not different from you, and experiencing the fact, well, yes, indeed, we are brothers in the true sense of that which is essence in you and which is essence in me is indeed one.
What's this do to the free enterprise market system?
Well, what it does, if I understand it right, is it moves the basic motivation from an achievement, competitive, to a collaborative kind of enterprise, which means that I'm not working in order to beat you out, but you and I are working in order to both make it. Now, at this point, I'm aware that you're a separate individual from me. We're separate, but there's something similar, all right? Now, at this point, there is the start to break down of the separation, the separation between us. For example, I might look down, and this is an external hallucination. I will see my body disappear, right? Or see those ways in which I am different become like learned things that I wear, like this sweater. For example, PhD, what does that mean? All right, it means I got a certain kind of education, acquired a certain degree for being more educated than 0.1% of the world's population, or something like that, all right? And that assures me of something or other in society, all right? In fact, it's a garb I wear. If I had the gown and the cap, that would be the external symbol of that same thing, right? Now, that gown is a psychological gown I wear, just like Richard Alpert is a gown I wear. It's an identity that I've taken on. I wasn't born Richard Alpert. I was just born as a human being. And then I learned this whole business of who I am and whether I'm good or bad or achieving or not. All that's learned along the way. And you see all those learned things separate. So you start to have this dissociative experience of where all that you become is awareness, is a point of awareness. That's all that's left. And I remember the first time this happened to me, as professor went, and middle-class boy went, and pilot went, and all of my games were like going off into the distance. I got this terrible panic, because indeed, I was going to cease to exist. And I got the panic, which is the panic that precedes the psychological death, because indeed, Richard Alpert was dying at that point. And the panic was, no, stop, I've got to hold on to something so I'll know who I am. And Timothy, the wise old Timothy, always says things like, trust your nervous system.
Oh, and his name was Richard. His name was Richard Alpert before he became Ram Dass. And I mean, that just kind of gives you an idea. I mean, the clarity of which he speaks about these experiences, it's obvious to see why these guys were leading were leading something that the government didn't like. You know, Timothy Leary was arrested many times. You know, one of my favorite stories about Leary was he got arrested, and they threw him in prison. And when you get into prison, you have to take a psychiatric evaluation. And this will determine the level of security that you were put in based on your answers. And, you know, Timothy Leary got placed into the lowest level of security, and he ended up escaping from prison. And the reason he was able to escape is because he wrote the questions and the answers for the tests that you take to determine your level of security. He wrote that for the prison systems. So he knew what to write. So these guys are cool. And Timothy Leary died, I don't know, maybe in the early 2000s or something, way before I was old enough to properly understand what was going on. And so they kind of went two different directions. Timothy Leary was very kind of scientific-minded and maybe a bit atheistic, maybe. I don't know if that's the right thing to say. I don't know what his views were. But Ram Dass was having all these spiritual experiences, and then he thought maybe he could find some answers in India. So he took LSD with him. He went to India. He, met some people, this and that. Met a guy named Bhagwan Das who took him to meet a guru called Neem Karoli Baba. And Ram Dass is called Richard Alpert at this point. He's still Harvard professor. He's, he's still very much in his role of being who he was before he was Ram Dass. And he was with this guru, and people were touching his feet, and he was like, oh, God, I'm not going to go touch this old man's dirty feet. He's naked. He's just wrapped in a blanket. What am I doing in India? I'm barefoot. Oh, my God, what did I get myself into? So he goes out to the river, and his mom had died. So he was pretty upset about that, and just thinking about life out in India by himself, looking up at the stars around the river in Nainital. And he decides to leave. He's like, this isn't right for me. I got to move on from here. And the next day he goes to say goodbye to everybody. Thank you for having me here. It was a pleasure to stay at the temple and have this experience. And as he was getting ready to say goodbye, Neem Karoli Baba, the guru, he goes, he kind of stops him from talking and says, you were out at the river last night. He's saying this in Hindi, so it has to be translated. And he says, you were out in the river last night. And someone says, Baba is saying that you were out standing at the river last night. And he goes, yeah. And he goes, and you were thinking about your mom. And he goes, Baba says you were thinking about your mom. And he starts thinking, he's like, what the fuck? Yeah. And then he says, she died of the spleen. And Ram Dass said he said spleen in English. And as soon as he said spleen, he said it was a psychedelic experience. He had this complete just mind-blown explosion of chaotic what the heck is going on just in his head. He was like out of body, like, what the fuck? How could he possibly know this? And he starts going through all the motions of, are the CIA here? Are they fucking with me? Because this is Ram Dass. The CIA was totally involved with Timothy Leary and stuff like that. He was like, maybe the CIA is filling these guys information about me, and like they're fucking with me. And Ram Dass was really running through the mill of possibilities of how it was real that he could know this thing. It's not like he went around telling people, I was out thinking about my mom last night. This was a personal moment for him where he decided it was time for him to move on. And the guru, Neem Karoli Baba, who I got a picture right here. You can't see him. Maybe I'll pull it up and I'll grab it in a minute. But he knew. And so Ram Dass decides to stay. He said, well, okay, wait a second. Maybe there's something here for me. Ram Dass was carrying around LSD with him. And, he would talk about the effects of it and how it's spiritual and connects you to understandings of God and samadhi. And Neem Karoli Baba, we'll call him Maharaji, That's what they refer to him as, Maharaji, which means something like king, the great king, Maha, or Maharaj means the great king. And this is like a nickname, you know. You can call many people Maharaj that have some kind of, you know, respectful status. And Ji is like saying sir. So we call him Maharaji. And Maharaji goes, give me some of that yogi medicine to Ram Dass. Give me some of that yogi medicine. So Ram Dass is like, okay. He pulls it out of his pocket, and he's like, okay, I got like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pills. Okay, I can give this guy probably all he needs is about half of one. And then as he's like doing this in his head, Maharaji grabs them all and puts them in his mouth. He eats them all at once. And Ram Dass is like, oh, fuck. He's like, one of these is enough to mess you up very bad. This old man just ate all of them. I'm going to kill this old man. Fuck, what did I just do? He doesn't know about the power of Western medicine. You know, it's not really a joke. You can, you know, like Ram Dass was like, ugh. And then all of a sudden, Maharaji starts like rocking back and forth and puts his head down and puts his face up and he's making crazy faces. And Ram Dass is like, oh my God, what have I done? And here, let me grab this picture. I'll show you. So he goes, I have just killed this old man. And then Maharaji starts laughing, and he goes, he says, this will put you in a room with Christ. He said darshan. He said, this will give you darshan of Christ, which means to be in the presence of something holy. This will put you in the presence of Christ. But you have to leave. And he said to Ram Dass that it's better to become Christ than to just hang out with him. So it's better to be that space, the psychedelic space, than it is to just, you know, use it as to get high or whatever. And he said that yogis have known about this experience for many years. They used to use plants way back ago, but we have lost that knowledge, and the yogis don't do the right preparations for these things anymore. That's what he said to Ram Dass. We have known about this for many years. So I wanted to go to a Ram Dass retreat. I used to listen to the Joe Rogan podcast a lot. There's a guy in there called Duncan Trussell, and Duncan hosts a TV show on Netflix, a Netflix series called The Midnight Gospel. He's the host of a podcast called the Duncan Trussell Family Hour. And I'm a big fan of Duncan. And I sent Duncan a message on Twitter saying like, oh man, I would love to go to one of these Ram Dass retreats, but they're so expensive. I actually don't even know what I said, but I remember at some point in the conversation I mentioned this, and Duncan said, here, reach out to Raghu, tell him you're a YouTuber, and cross your fingers. I was like, okay. So I reached out to Raghu Markus, who is was with Ram Dass, with Neem Karoli Baba, with Maharaji back in India, and now he runs the Ram Dass Foundation. Love, serve, remember. So this is like the guy of guys, you know, Raghu. So I write Raghu, I say, Dear Raghu, my name is Dakota. I have a YouTube channel where I talk about spirituality. I really love the teachings of Ram Dass. Would you let me come to the retreat in exchange for, I'll film the video, I'll help clean, I'll just whatever you need. I will do anything if I can come to this retreat. Raghu said, yes, you know, come hang out, film a couple videos, and enjoy yourself. You can meet everybody. So I said, okay, cool. You know, my heart was pounding. I was like, oh my God. Like I get to meet all these guys. These are the guys, these are like, they were with these are Ram Dass's best friends. You know, these guys were all with Maharaji back in India. Like this was such a cool cultural little moment, and these guys played a huge part in all that. So I was like, oh yes, I get to meet someone really cool. Anyways, I fly out to California. I meet up with Koi Fresco. And I asked, I was like, hey, is it cool if I bring this guy with me, Koi Fresco? I was a little nervous, and, Koi had a car and shit like that, so he could drive. So I was like, yo, is it okay if I bring this guy with me? He'll make a video too. And, oops, sorry about that. And then they were like, yeah, come on. So we drive out there to Ojai from Venice, where Koi Fresco was living. And I'm just walking to this big old kind of mansion / temple thing. And there are big pictures of Maharaji on the wall, big Hanuman pictures, pictures of Ram Dass. There's Raghu. There is Trevor Hall, Krishna Das. There's Ram Dass on. He was on Skype. He's very old. Ram Dass was at the time, so he wasn't traveling. He was staying in Hawaii where he lived. So we would talk to him on Skype, introduce ourselves, and it was almost surreal. It's just like, oh my God, like everyone's just here chilling. It's just like I can just walk up and fist bump Trevor Hall or say hello to Ram Dass on Skype. And Ram Dass gave me some advice. I was like, I had to ask Ram Dass a question. So I asked him, I was like, I forget exactly how I worded it. I was like, how am I, Ram Dass, like, I think I asked him, when I look out into the world and see all this suffering, like what am I supposed to do? I actually I got filmed it right here. Let's see what I say. I'm curious. I haven't listened to this in a long time.
Hello, Ram Dass.
Hello.
Okay.
Namaste.
Namaste. Okay, so my question for you.
Namaste.
Okay, yeah.
My question for you is,
I was so nervous.
as like a young person, when I look out into the world, I sort of see all these problems that we're confronted with as a collective. So what would your advice be for myself and for all of us to reconnect with love and to find a way that we can express that love inwardly so that we can usher in a culture that
Shut up, Dakota.
is
Talking. Why
aligned
am I
with
talking
those
so?
values. So what is your advice for us to reconnect with love in a time where we're confronted with all this suffering?
No, the suffering and the confronting is in your mind. That's the first thing. So,
I'll take that.
and your love is in your heart and your soul. So it's all inside you. And you can make boogeymans.
Yeah.
Like make it here.
Yeah.
And I think that we all keep our hearts open and radiate in everything you do. Radiate love, because if you
Well, that was the first time I talked to Ram Dass right there. If you want to watch the whole thing, it's like 10 minutes long, and it's on my YouTube video. It's just called On Skype with Ram Dass. It's on my YouTube channel, Dakota of Earth on YouTube, On Skype with Ram Dass. So, at this retreat, I decided there was something in India for me, and that I wanted to go there to, I don't know. I don't know what I was going to find. I just wanted to be a part of a story. Because in a lot of ways, like I said earlier, this is sort of the echo of what started not only like thousands of years ago with shamans dancing around fires and mixing plants together and having these experiences, but of our culture here in the States, when Gordon Wasson went to Mexico and met Maria Sabina, and then Aldous Huxley, and, outside of these scientific guys, more so like the Jack Kerouacs, the Timothy Learys, the Baba Ramdases, these guys that lived and breathed poetry. I feel like I'm an echo of that, and I want to live my life invoking that same mystery that those guys make me feel. So, like, for me, this was all about being a part of a story and creating something beautiful with my life. So I was like, there's something in India for me. So I said, fuck it. I booked a one-way ticket there. And these guys, Raghu, Krishna Das. You guys know who Krishna Das is? If you don't know who Krishna Das is, go type in his music and listen to it. People in India touch Krishna Das's feet when they see him because he sings with such holy beauty, I guess. Anyways. These guys were like, hey, we're going to be in India at the same time. Let's meet up in New Delhi. You come with us to Kenchi Dham in Nainital. This is the ashram where Ram Dass met Maharaji. I was like, oh my God. Like, what is happening to my life? This is a big part of my life, this story. This is a huge defining moment for me. I said yes. I met up with these guys in India, and I'm like looking at them with like, the way like a cat looks at something when its pupils get all big. Like I'm in love, and I'm in love, like I'm totally blown away by this experience that they're allowing me to have. Because if I were to go to Kenchi by myself, the ashram, they wouldn't let me stay there. You have to have special permission to stay there. You can't go in the back areas. It's very limited, and but if you come there with the people that were there since the 60s and 70s, then you get treated a little bit different. You get treated like family. So this was an honor. We pull up. We're driving through the mountains of Nainital, the foothills of the Himalayas, and on the street next to our car is a leopard just walking, a giant cat, wild, walking on the road. And you can see Kenchi at the bottom of the hill. So I'm like, okay, well, this is a powerful welcome. This is going to be a nice 2 weeks. We pull up to the ashram. We get greeted by some of the staff there. They take our bags up to the rooms and kind of showing us around. They open the doors, and there's these really just not so bad, actually. I'm like, oh, this isn't so bad. We're in the middle of nowhere, really, in India. There's a nice little river. And I'm just like, oh, man, this is where it all started. A huge part of the psychedelic story happened right here. And I just am breathing in this fresh air and just seen a leopard. So I'm like, what the fuck? India's crazy. And, yeah, they're showing us the rooms. And they're like, Raghuji, this is where you'll stay, to Raghu. And, it's got like a nice little cot and stuff like that. I'm like, oh, yeah, I can sleep here. This is nice. Krishna Das, this is your room. And Mohan Baba, like all the old guys, this is your guys' rooms. And then I'm like, okay, cool. Like, just kind of standing there. Me and Lucian was my roommate. Lucian was Ram Dass's caretaker. So back in Hawaii, he would take care of Ram Dass, roll his wheelchair around, cook for him, whatever. I'm like, okay, Lucian, where's our room at? And they're like, you guys will stay up there at the top of the hill up in the cabin. And they call it the White House. We're like, oh. So you mean we have to walk up the hill where the leopard was? And they're like, yeah. And we're like, oh, okay. They're like, Vinod will take you. So we're like, okay, we go with this guy. We leave the property of the temple area. We walk up, and there's a little farm and a big house with some rooms. They're like, here's the bathroom, and they like creak this door open. Something else. Imagine that was wood. They crack this door open. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, very basic toilet and very basic situation, which is cool with me. I'm not high end. So then they open the room for us, and it's just like a mat on the ground that's about like, I don't know, an inch thick. And there are spiders the size of my hand everywhere. And they give us a little pillow that's like the size of a cushion. Like a cushion that's like on a, like outside, that you would have on like a patio outside your house, with like a little bench, like a little tiny bench pillow. And he just was like, here you go. Toss it on the ground next to these huge spiders. You can see all this and I filmed this on my YouTube from like 2017 or something like that. If you like go back in my videos, from my first India videos, you can see how big these spiders are in like the room that we were staying in. Anyways, I loved it. I was like, this is how those guys were staying back in the day. So it was really cool for me, despite being a little kind of scary with this. I mean, when I say there's spiders everywhere, I mean there's probably 30 in the room, and they're all huge, like 5 inches big. So we would wake up every morning for breakfast, and they would feed us every morning, and we would do arti. We would sing songs to each of the statues they have there, probably like 6 statues, and you would sing to each of the deities. And then you end with Hanuman and a big statue of Maharaji. Every morning we did this. It would probably take an hour and a half of singing each morning in Sanskrit. And you had to be part of it. They would be offended if you didn't show up. So, we would really partake. And it's about discipline, and that's the whole point of the ashram, is to be devoted and in service. So, it was cool. We'd go sit by Krishna Das and Raghu, and they would just tell us these stories about what it was like to be there back in, 71. They would say, like, I remember when Raghu came, this little young guy from Canada. Because Raghu had met Ram Dass. Raghu was a radio host, and up in Canada, in Montreal, I believe. And someone was like, hey, you should interview Ram Dass. He'll be here. It'd be a cool interview. And he's like, okay, sure, I'll interview Ram Dass. Ram Dass comes into the radio. He does an interview. And Raghu somehow decides, like, okay, I just had my mind blown. I guess I'm going to go to India. I want a part of this, what this guy's saying. So Raghu drops everything, goes to India, and some of these guys are already there. When a new Westerner shows up, everyone's all like, like, who's this guy? I go, where are you from? What are you doing here? And so Krishna Das is telling us this story, and Raghu is sitting right next to us, He's like some Canadian guy who shows up, right? And he goes up to Maharaji. He asked Maharaji a question, and this is Raghu. And Raghu, not really knowing the deal, he thought he had to ask Maharaji something, because Maharaji's like, what are you doing here? Why'd you come all the way from Canada to this little mountain ashram? Like, what are these crazy Westerners? Maharaji would be like, why do they keep coming here? And he said, why are you here? And Raghu, thinking he has to say something spiritual, he says, teach me how to meditate. And Maharaji's like, oh God. Because he didn't really talk about stuff like that. It wasn't about meditation or any crazy discipline. They used to say when they would meditate, Maharaji would throw an apple at them and disrupt their meditation. Or he would ask you questions like, how is your family? How are your parents? This kind of thing. When you asked him how to raise Kundalini, he would say, feed people. So it's like, what do you make of this kind of stuff? What do you make of these things? You leave your culture. Some of these guys are Jewish or Christians. The last thing they want to hear is meditate like Christ, which is what he told Raghu. Meditate like Christ. Like, you don't want to hear that. You went across India not to hear about the traditions you were raised with. So Raghu comes out from his meeting with Maharaji, and all the guys are like, okay, what did Maharaji tell you? And he said, he told me to meditate like Christ. And they're all like, meditate like Christ? What does that even mean? So they all get together and like, okay, we're going to get him. Ram Dass, go in there and ask him, how did Christ meditate? Because then they could get some kind of practice or something out of him, right? They're like, finally, he'll give us a discipline. Stop throwing apples at us. So Ram Dass goes in there and goes, Maharaji, you told this new Canadian to meditate like Christ. How did Christ meditate? And Maharaji, he looks at everyone and opens his mouth as if he's going to say something super profound. And instead, he just stops. And they said it was so quiet that it was like the whole world had stopped. And he looked down and sat in silence for a few minutes. And everyone was in this kind of anticipation of what's going to happen. And he looked up, and a single tear falls down his eye. And he said, he lost himself in love. He lost himself in love. And he said that Christ never died. He lives in the hearts of everyone. He never died. No one understands. Christ never died. He lost himself in love. So, that's a great story. And Krishna Das and Raghu would tell us all these stories like this. Like, Maharaji was known for miracles, all kinds of things they would talk about. You know, he was able to turn water into milk, or one time we were out sitting drinking chai at the top of the little restaurant near the ashram. It was probably 9-10 o'clock at night, drinking chai with Krishna Das, me and Lucian. And Krishna Das goes, one time Maharaji, we were driving back from Rishikesh or somewhere, and we ran out of gas in the middle of nowhere. We waited for a little bit, no cars came. We were like, shit. He's like, what are we going to do? It's going to be forever before a car comes and picks us up. India wasn't like how it is now, infrastructure-wise, you know. Some of these roads were very, you know, not, you're in the middle of nowhere sometimes. So Maharaji gets up and says, hold on, I got this. And he pees in the gas tank, and apparently the car started back up. So you hear all these kind of hilarious stories. But I didn't get to meet him, obviously. He died in the 70s, Maharaji did. But these guys have devoted their lives to him still. You know, these guys are in their 70s. Ram Dass was completely devoted to him because of the things he said he was shown. That he was enlightened, is what they say. And that he really did have these abilities to transcend time and know everything about you. That this psychedelic experience that we tap in, that gives us this kind of religious experience or all this information about the meaning of life, and when it gives us experience of transcending time and seeing everything happening at once instead of being bound to this linear sort of conveyor belt of seeing things chained in moments to moment to moment. He was outside of that. And that's how he was able to know all these things, is what they say. And they all had these experiences with him. He read all their minds, and he was able to open their hearts. And you see it when you're with these guys. And when he died, a woman named Siddhima, she took over the ashram, and she was the woman that was there, the saint. She was a saint. She was there when I was there, and she died a month after I left. So it was a real good blessing to see this kind of, to be a part of this lineage of, well, in India, they have like a lineage where you have a guru, and the guru has this disciple, and then there's a kind of this passing down of energetic love from guru to disciple, and then to the disciples of that disciple, and all the way down. You know, and some people believe you can trace some of that back all the way to Shiva, or Krishna, or Ram. So, I spent 2 weeks there at the ashram. Had a beautiful experience, really tapped into all that. Got to sit on the rock the Maharaja used to meditate on every morning. Lots of interesting synchronicities. And then also, they were like, hey, you should come with us to meet this guy in the jungle. They were calling him Jungle Baba. They were like, there's this Babaji that lives in the jungle. He left his family when he was a kid. He lived in a cave. He saved someone that got bit by a serpent by chanting mantras over him. Brought him back to life. They're like, there's this crazy guy. You should go meet him. So I went with all of them into the jungles of Gwalior. They took me to this ancient temple. And there was this little naked man, the Jungle Baba. And he had his issues, no doubt. And I spent a lot of time with him, probably a month with him in total over a few years, staying with him in the jungle. Even your mate Tom, my homie Tom, he went there. And yeah, I mean, we would be there. Krishna Das would be singing Hanuman Chalisas and Om Namah Shivaya. And it's just like, it's the kind of stuff that you dream of when you're a fan of Ram Das or when you're a fan of Krishna Das. And it's just like, yeah. It's cool. It changed my life. And I think about those moments all the time. It almost feels like a past life. So, then I was invited to Hawaii to actually go to Ram Dass's house and meet Ram Dass. And we pulled up to this beach. And there he was. Ram Dass was just sitting there in his beach wheelchair, just enjoying the water. And Krishna Das was there. Lucian was there. My friend JR was there. It was like a homie get-together. And I was like, hey, Ram Dass, nice to finally meet you. And he's like, Dakota, it's nice to meet you too. You know, and I was like, oh, this is Ram Dass. I'm in Hawaii on there's a big turtle right there. Ram Dass. And then I went to his house. I got to sit in his living room. If you guys have seen that Going Home documentary on Netflix about Ram Dass, it was filmed at his home. So I got to see the garden with the Ganesh statue and stuff. And it was just like, oh, man. Lucian lived out in that garden in a little house. I got a shirt. I have one of Ram Dass's shirts. Lucian was like, here, take this. Where's it at? This is one of Ram Dass's shirts from his house. Lucian was like, here. Because they were donating a bunch of clothes. He's like, take this one. It's got a little turtle on it. And then I also have a copy of Be Here Now right here. That was signed by Baba Ram Dass. It says, Namaste, Ram Dass. Hawaii was great. It was really nice to be with Ram Dass at the end of his life. There was one moment, actually, we were in a room. There was probably like 8 of us just chilling in this room. Ram Dass was there. They wanted us to watch a film that they were going to release, a documentary about Ram Dass's life that the foundation had been working on. So we were with Ram Dass, and we were all supposed to kind of give how we were just watching this document, give feedback about editing and stuff like that. But it was so surreal. Ram Dass was sitting in front of me. I was watching Ram Dass, watching himself on a screen about a documentary about his life. It was like this weird fractal implosion. It's just like, oh, how did I get here? Duncan was there. Duncan had just got married to his wife. Ram Dass married them. I did a podcast with Duncan. My very first podcast ever was actually filmed with Duncan. My very first podcast ever. I never did a podcast ever in my life. And Raghu was like, hey, go do a podcast with those guys. Kind of talked him into it. But I'm thankful for it. And I was so nervous the whole time. And that's on my YouTube now. I think it's like episode 21 or something. It's also on Spotify or anywhere you listen to podcasts. And, yeah, then not so long after all that, Ram Dass, he left his body. He left his body. Ram Dass, he used to say that death will be like taking off a tight shoe. Here's a little video. We'll end the podcast with this. But that's basically, yeah, that's the story of how I met Ram Dass and how I ended up in India. India changed my life. Truly, I could make a whole podcast about India. The chaos, the beauty. India only comes in extremes.
The important thing that you prepare yourself, that is, go into your...
Let's get a different. There's got to be a good one in here about death. But India... people, you know what? People think India is going to change their life spiritually because of all of the holiness and the Vedas and Shiva and the Ganga. But the thing that changes you about India is that you're forced to be put in such an uncomfortable situation that it either breaks people or you understand yourself on a whole new spiritual level. The people there, some people have nothing. And you're like, how? Are they smiling still? You see people like using the restroom in the street. You see dead animals, trash. And you say like, how can you smile? Like, you feel so much suffering when you see this, and then you look over and everyone's happy. Like, you're suffering more than the people around you. So India puts you in such a strange position that you have no choice but to examine yourself. And there is also the beauty of the Vedas and the beauty of temples and Shiva, but you gotta, I don't know. It's there. It's all there. India's got everything. Okay, you ready? Let's end this. Let's end this with a beautiful Ram Dass video. I gotta find a good one. We'll just click. We'll click this one right here. Thank you guys for listening to the podcast. My name is Dakota, and this is it's a place for humans. Thank you, Baba Ram Dass.
The deepest fear that arises out of
the sense of separateness, the sense of being yourself, being somebody. That root fear, you're very vulnerable under those conditions because there are huge forces all around you. Forces of love, of hate, of violence, of economic, everything, all of it around you. So that to the extent you're identified with your separateness, it is inevitable that there will be fear. And it'll be fear of this and that, and fear of this, fear that something, fear of hurt, fear of this, fear of that. My suggestion is that instead of responding to each fear specifically, you work on the other part of you, which is the feeling of your connectedness to all things. And let the fear manifest as it manifests. And then you cultivate an ability to just notice it without judging it. The minute you judge it as a failure on your part or something wrong, it is a natural part of your separateness. It's built in. We all have that. Some of us are obsessed by it because our minds focus around it and create around it. But the answer to me is not to try to push away the fear, but to cultivate the other part of yourself that is connected to all things. Because that part of it has no fear. Because there's nothing that can happen to it. It can't go anywhere. It's just changing its form all the time. I mean, as you die, your cells change, the energy changes, you turn into something else. You're all still part of the same thing you were part of. It's just the form changing. And when you recognize that, there's something in you that balances that fear and makes it different. Because when you sit and look at a fear, you say, well, I can be afraid of physical something, or I can be afraid of social, psychological things. And I guess I've had life experiences, and I think most people have, where something you feared came to pass, and you realized that what came to pass was much less debilitating than the fear of it in the first place. And you kind of keep profiting by that in some way, so that you see that even as you're frightened, it's really just a trip your head is laying on you. I mean, this is really what meditative practice is about, is learning how to extricate yourself from the web of thought forms that are creating your own suffering. Because the fear is a set of thought forms, is really what it is. It's a way of defining the non-definable in a way that creates an arising of a certain emotion in you. And as you keep learning how to extricate awareness from identifying with thought, you begin to see them arise, exist, pass away. There's a fear, it comes and goes. I think it's very important that one acknowledge one's fear, that one allow it to give it space. I think the acting out is not necessary. It's like anger. I don't think you have to go beat somebody up or beat a pillow or anything, but you have to acknowledge the fact that you're angry. And there are ways of allowing your humanity fully, which includes the fear, because part of it is witnessing, noticing it, allowing it, giving it space, letting it be your humanity and letting it come and go.
Thanks for listening.